The Empowerment Chronicles, number 4, continuation. Just because as name his greatness was revealed and his leprosy was concealed, still does not give one permission to look down on others. The answer to this argument then is discovered in Romans 11:29, when Paul the Apostle profoundly states that the gifts and callings of God are without repentance. In other words, it is quite clear we make a grave error anytime we equate one's ability to flow in his or her gifting or calling with that of excellent character. Never confuse great charisma with great character. Many of the tragedies of modern church history from a leadership perspective are saturated with examples and instances of individuals and ministries who paraded their gifts but ignored their character. God is calling his people back to a place of repentance, and it starts with you and I. For judgment shall begin in the house of the Lord. Never excuse your flaws because of the strength of your gifts. The burden and responsibility we bear as leaders is to master our gifts as we develop our character, simultaneously climbing the mountain of our ability as we cleave to the rock of good character. Good character is what brings credibility to or strength to the work of the ministry. Without it, we stumble and we fail. Emerging leaders, as you climb diligently through the opportunities that are presented by being skilled with your gift, always cleave to the rock of good character. You pray in tongues and give all that you have to the poor, but can you walk in love? You have a strong deliverance ministry, but are you pursuing God for your deliverance? I am convinced that the church of the day resembles the Corinthian church. We love to pray in tongues and prophesy, yet we're divisive, competitive, always looking for an advantage over one another. We're like brute beast church gladiators, wrestling for position and power in order to say who's the greatest. But in spite of how many spiritual sons and daughters you claim, or churches you have established, or degrees you've attained, the truth is there is none great but God. Because if he removes his armor, naming the general, you're nothing but a leopard. And if they look great and act great, please know it's God that rests on them. Some people need to be honest with those they serve and say, don't get me confused with God. I'm just a man. Furthermore, this problem of being elevated squarely on the basis of what man says is compounded all the more with the fact that man is always looking to nominate an Eliab, someone simply on the basis of some natural or spiritual achievement. David, just because you killed Goliath does not mean you're ready for kingship. The thinking is that if they can preach real good and prophesy, then they must have arrived. It must be their appointed time because they're anointed. But just because you're anointed does not mean it's your appointed time to operate in the full measure of what God has called you into. The problem with this thought process is that many ministers have bought into it. They have allowed flawed creatures who are under the influence of the enemy to feed their egos with flattery and sometimes insincere praise. Pastor is just awesome. You sure enough can preach. You're highly anointed. You're the best preacher ever. And so the aftermath is that we have created within our places of worship what I call pulpit gods, idols, because whenever we fail to check ourselves by examining ourselves with accurate scales and accurate weights, that is sober judgment, we run the risk of becoming arrogant. I firmly believe that the arrogant preacher is not a product of God, but the product of man. He has allowed too much of what people have said to him to pump him up above measure. But they have to realize that in spite of what man says, you are still a flawed general.